Speaking of morally corrupt.
Man, what a friggin' story to wake up to this week. You check your phone. I checked my phone and it was like the first notification from ESPN, LIV and PGA Tour merging. And even if you're not like, okay, this story has been kind of going on for a while now. The LIV Tour came about a year ago. But it's more of like a social story than a human interest in some ways than it is about sports. Even if you don't care about golf, this story is huge right now.
Yeah. So to summarize, the Saudi government, and I'm going to summarize it and you can add detail where you'd like to.
Yeah.
The Saudi government created this golf league. They used this, what is it called? Like it's FIP.
PIF.
PIF. Yeah. Public Investment Fund. And it's government money. Right. They basically created this like lost leader. They basically, all they didn't make any money. They just challenged the PGA. They just took leverage away from the PGA, who was operating essentially a monopoly with the greatest players in the world. Yeah. And because of that, there was no like collective bargaining. There was no like reason for the PGA to treat players better. This LIV Golf Tour pays these players an exorbitant amount of money. Phil Mickelson, one of the greatest golfers of all time, got a contract that was reportedly like 2.5 times his career earnings. One of the most decorated careers in the history of golf. Yeah. And he got 2.5 times his career earnings. Many of these guys were signing for 9-figure deals, which was just insane compared to what. And then they would lose sponsorships and it was unpopular because the Saudi government has some human rights issues.
Yeah, that's putting it nicely.
Sure. So first off, and I'm not like a big 9/11 historian by any means. Contemporary belief is that the Saudi government holds most/all, or I think probably most of the blame for 9/11.
Yeah.
Or at least they are the government that holds the most. Obviously, like, it was conducted by a terrorist group, but so I guess we'll just say it and then I'll make my devil's advocate points later.
Yeah.
They propped up this terrorist group.
Yes. There is a lot of controversy around the Saudi government. And Saudi government, they create this PIF, the Public Investment Fund, as basically a way to, according to what I'm looking at right here, created in 1971 for the purpose of investing funds on behalf of the government of Saudi Arabia. So basically the government of Saudi Arabia is investing in sports.
Sure.
And kind of like the criticism of this whole process is that they're basically using golf as a way to kind of put like a positive spin on all the bad shit that they do as a government. Sure. Right. And you can do whatever you want with your money. So they totally have a right to do that. They made it worth the players' while to come be on the LIV Tour. The LIV Tour has been, I think, what most would consider an unmitigated disaster. They broadcast games on the CW.
Sure.
No one watches them. They cut out of tournaments. The format for their tournaments is not that fun, as it turns out. There's just a lot that goes on that makes it worse golf. It's kind of like a minor league, but they're paying people so much money that why wouldn't they come join this tour?
Right. They created this thing, and it's a perfect analogy. And this got sent to me also with like, it's one of those videos where they put the LIV logo and the PGA logo on like a sitcom characters. And when in The Office, so I'm taking this from a meme is what I'm saying. In The Office, Michael Scott leaves Dunder Mifflin, creates the Michael Scott Paper Company.
Yes.
It wasn't that his company was successful, but it was that it was hurting Dunder Mifflin enough that they had to do something. So they basically bought him out.
Yeah.
And they didn't, I don't think this is a buyout. It's a merger. I guess we'll see what the details are.
I've seen that comparison a lot. People have used the Michael Scott Paper Company as a punchline for this entire merger. But the one thing I would say is that they basically reversed the roles. It'd be like if the Michael Scott Paper Company bought Dunder Mifflin in this case, because what has basically happened is that the LIV Tour comes about a year ago. Everybody thinks, okay, this is going to be short-lived. These players who have defected over to the LIV Tour are going to pay fines or pay some sort of price to have to get back into the PGA at some point in time.
Also, there was some idea that many of these players were like washed up past their prime.
There was, but initially that was the case. Initially, they get Phil Mickelson. They get some of these older players that have had good careers.
Phil Mickelson, who ties for second at the Masters this year.
Yeah. And then
Brooks Koepka, coming off of an injury, who wins was it the U.S. Open or the PGA Championship this year? Whichever one just happened. This is the other thing for me is like, this is interesting to me. I don't follow professional golf nearly as closely as other sports.
I don't either. I mean, I follow it a little bit, and we both like to golf.
Yes.
But following the sport itself is like, unless you are just rooting for one player, like why would you necessarily follow the sport? It's not like super compelling most of the time until you have a story like this. So, I mean, this becomes a big story over the past year or so. And of course, as soon as people find out that the Saudi government is behind this league, behind these exorbitant salaries that they're paying players, everybody has an opinion all of a sudden. Most people here in America.
Sure.
This is like the one thing that is like kind of bridged the political divide, whether you're liberal or conservative. I've heard people on both ends of the spectrum who are upset about the LIV Tour because whatever their belief is, whether, again, conservative or liberal, it goes against what the Saudi government stands for. Because if you're a liberal person, you think the morality of what these people are doing, what these golfers are doing, going and taking what is effectively blood money from this government agency is wrong. And if you're a conservative person, you're saying they're not patriotic, right? Like like you mentioned earlier, this is a group that could be seen as at least partially responsible for one of the worst terrorist acts in American history.
And now outside of like Pearl Harbor, it's got to be
right. And now you have American golfers going and basically working for these people, right? Like, so no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, this sports story has somehow united Americans.
By the way, I'm not trying to. Pearl Harbor was not a terrorist attack; it was a military attack. But it was like outside of Pearl Harbor, or maybe including Pearl Harbor, was the most significant attack on U.S. soil since the Revolutionary War.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think there's any denying that. So just from like a historical perspective, this is there's a lot to take into account with this story that just happens to do with golf.
So there's a bad Bryson DeChambeau. By the way, there's like 3 players that I like a lot, and Bryson DeChambeau is one of them, but it's the same reasons that I like Trevor Bauer. It's not because I like agree with him politically. He's a tinkerer. Yeah. He's an analytics guy. He's like sees the game differently than other people, positive or negative. He uses single length irons, which to me make a ton of sense, and I use single length irons. The clubs that I was using.
This is like when I about a year or two ago, I had the idea to take an inch off my driver.
Sure, I've also done this.
And when I took it into the shop, the guy who was like 3 inches shorter than me was like, "That's too much. You're too tall." I'm like, first of all, this is the first time in my life anyone's ever said I was too tall.
Yeah.
And second of all, I had looked up online just to see the pros and how long they keep their drivers. Almost every single one of them takes some distance or takes some length off their driver or their clubs, because they make them for like guys who are like 6'5".
Yeah. I don't want this argument with those people, so I started doing that stuff at home. I did the same thing. I'm a tinkerer. Golf is a game with a limitless tinkering, right?
Absolutely.
And I think he's an interesting guy. On YouTube, he explains stuff very well. He has this interview with Caitlin Collins, who became famous recently, in my world anyway, for the town hall she did with Donald Trump, where I actually I don't know. We do this thing. There's this conservative thing that it's conservatives that do this, where they go, she's so bad at this, or she is just not good at this, or something like that. And it's like, I mean, she's reached like the pinnacle of her field. This is what it bothers me too, when people are like, Donald Trump is stupid, Joe Biden is stupid. I'm like, you may disagree with them, but these are not stupid men. Like, these guys have ascended to become the leader of the free world.
Yeah,
they've done something that's somewhat intelligent.
This is how society works now. It's if you see something that opposes your viewpoint. In this case, Caitlin Collins is a CNN anchor. So if you are on a certain side of the political spectrum, CNN is your enemy. And like what you just said with like Biden and Trump, if you see either one of those as opposing you, you just immediately resort to the name calling. Yeah. Even if you know, like even in the back of your mind, you know that you're wrong for it. The way we deal with our problems now is to just immediately resort to hitting below the belt. Right?
What I will say I like about Caitlin Collins and Bryson DeChambeau is that liberals and conservatives hated Caitlin Collins. and similarly, like, I think DeChambeau is a thorn in the side of everybody.
Yeah.
And I like that because to me, I trust those people. I believe that they're doing like what they actually mean. There was someone else that I was going to talk to you about like this that's like, oh, it was, Mike Pence came out as like, they were like, would you ban abortion? And he's like, of course I would. And it's like, yeah. He's honest. Like
yeah. I mean, you know that he was going to say. Okay, we'll get to this.
But he's not wishy-washy.
Let's set up what happens here. So at the time we're recording this, it's barely been 24 hours since news of this merger, bro. This is still a really big deal.
Also, there's another question here, which is because we didn't bring everything, are we going to try to somehow capture this interview?
No, I think we can just summarize it. I think, in the 24 hours since this news is broke, or slightly more than that, somehow they've managed to get a ton of microphones in front of pro golfers to get their take on what occurred here. And
well, I think there's like they're preparing for a tournament, right? Like,
yeah, there's a couple things that have happened. One, it seems evident from most PGA golfers they had no idea this was going to happen. The general consensus is that the commissioner or the CEO of the PGA, I don't know exactly what his title is, the guy who heads up the PGA, Jay Monahan, he basically decided he wanted to get his cut of this exorbitant amount of money, and he sold out to the LIV Tour. He sold out to the Saudis, so he's going to get paid. He's going to be like Roger Goodell, but with golf. He's going to get a ton of money, and he sold out his entire league. That's effectively what he did, according to the PGA golfers who we've heard from already. But now, of course, they're talking to some of the LIV golfers, like Bryson DeChambeau. So he goes on CNN this morning, and I don't know who signed him up for this, but it was a terrible idea because he walked into a bear trap. I'm sure going into this, a lot of times when pro athletes do interviews like this, it's not to say that the questions are totally vetted ahead of time, but there is usually some agreement on what can and cannot be discussed.
Right.
And in this case, it seems like
they didn't ask him about gum disease. I'll tell you that much. They left gum disease off the table. These hard-hitting gum disease questions.
In this case, they either didn't prepare for these questions ahead of time, or CNN went off script.
Sure.
One of these two things happened, because Bryson DeChambeau gets asked about two things that he probably had no idea was coming. He gets asked about 9/11, which is never a good start.
Sure.
And then he gets asked about the American journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who a couple years ago was in Saudi Arabia and was murdered, presumably by the Saudi Arabian government.
It seems like it was by the government.
Or at the behest of the government. And still a hot button issue.
Sure.
Obviously, anytime you're dealing with the murder of anybody, let alone a journalist. So he gets asked about both these things, and he doesn't really know what to say. I'd say he handles it about as well as any pro athlete could handle those types of questions. But the reaction so far in the aftermath of this interview is a lot of people dunking all over Bryson DeChambeau. And again, it seems like I have no issue with people being upset with what DeChambeau said and how he answered these questions. He basically kind of poo-poos 9/11 and kind
to
of...
a degree, I think he qualifies it, but he first off, the guy's like 27 years old or something like that.
And he's a pro athlete. He's not...
Yeah, but also like...
he's not like a news person or a journalist. Like, what do you want him to say in this situation?
I'm going to pull up his age real quick, because I do think his age is relevant because...
Right.
And I'm gonna make this point a little bit later, but he is... Let's see, hold on. He is 29 years old. So he was like 6 or 7 years old, or maybe 7 or 8 years old when 9/11 happened. Yeah. I was 14. To me, it feels like a very distant memory. I'm sure if you were 18, 21, 30 when that happened, it's like even more significant. Part of my problem with this whole like this expectation that part of my problem with the painting of the PGA as the good guys and LIV as the bad guys, because first off, the U.S. government does like $50 billion of business with Saudi Arabia every year. Also, the PGA has sponsorships with Mercedes, with Volkswagen, with Nike, with these companies that also have these huge human rights concerns.
Yeah.
Mercedes was building fucking tanks or building vehicles and in Nazi Germany. Like these are part of the reason we're able to accept Mercedes is because that was 80 years ago.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like they just became a sponsor.
Yeah.
So time does heal some of those wounds in capitalism, whether you like it or not. And this dude is fucking barely remembers 9/11 probably.
That I absolutely agree with that. Two things. First, with respect to this interview itself, I feel like not just Bryson DeChambeau, I'm not giving him a pass here, but I think it's silly sometimes when we ask these types of questions of athletes. What are you expecting from these people? How would you expect a 29-year-old pro athlete who in his everyday life is so distant from an average person's reality that you could ask them what they think about the grocery store down the street, and they'll probably give you a different answer than what you'd expect.
You were the one that was talking about there was a football player that they like asked how much you think a gallon of milk is, and he was like $50. $20 bucks.
Yeah. Their perception of reality is different than ours, and of course, to the average person, that means it's bad, right?
Sure.
Like that their perception of reality is bad, and it's like you can think that, you can think it's bad, but a lot of times these guys are naive. And again, I'm not trying to give them a free pass. They kind of have to get themselves to our level, but the way that they go about their lives being pro athletes makes it harder to do that. It does, because you are so focused to get to the top of your profession of whatever it is, whether it's sports or otherwise. You're often so focused on whatever that thing is that you just don't have the capacity to pay attention to what might be going on in the world around you. And again, a lot of people are going to say that's that person's fault. And I agree to some degree.
So I think if you go into this interview, you got to be prepared to have answers for that. I think the answers he gave are political scripted answers, which what do you want him to say or do? That they probably didn't want him to do this interview, like you said. But also, I think the thing is, we're all the star of our own movie, but we rarely get put in front of cameras, right? Like you and I have a camera on us right now that we are aware of. But most people, like comedians, they think the rest of the world cares about comedy and knows about comedy so much more than they actually do. The day job you have, people view these things happening at your company, these interpolitical shit. I'm not saying this about your company in particular. I'm assuming based on companies I've worked at in the past. I can't even remember the name of the company you work for, but they believe. I worked at a box factory, and it was like people's lives were so compartmentalized that they're like, this thing happening at this box factory is the greatest injustice in my life. And it's like, fine, kind of, but it's also, people are being murdered in Yemen on a daily basis, and we're supposed to and also the other thing is like the PGA is full of a bunch of fucking old racist white guys, and our government is also taking part in horrific atrocities for centuries or for decades at least.
And that's kind of where I wanted to go next. I mean, I think to kind of summarize, like we need to have maybe lower expectations when we stick a camera and a microphone in front of an athlete and ask them very serious questions that, frankly, based on their age, their profession, what they do every day, they might not have the best answers for, because that's not
But they want to make bad guys.
If somebody came up to you on the street and asked you about 9/11 out of the blue, you might not have a great answer for them. Even though we all agree it's very bad. Yes, and I get it. Sometimes you just want these guys to say that, but they're trying to find the right way they're trying to find the right way around it. And again, it's just silly to expect pro athletes sometimes. I know that a lot of times they want to be more than the guy who just dribbles the ball or throws the ball or whatever. Right. But the reality is they're not often that. And that there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with them being that.
Sure.
So it's silly to expect perfect answers for these types of questions.
It's also silly to expect perfect morality from for-profit institutions. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's where I want to go next, because I think the reaction when the LIV Tour was first created a lot of moral righteousness from people.
Yeah.
And I get it. A lot of people said you can't get into bed with the Saudi government because of all the bad things they've done that we've talked about, right? But I think for a lot of people who were very upset about the LIV Tour existing were big golf fans. And the pervasive thought that I had is that they were upset because their perception of their sport was being tarnished by this competitive entity, sure. right? Regardless of the morality of the competitive entity, just the fact that the competitive entity came into existence pissed them off, right? Now golf is going to suffer. Now the golf that I love is going to suffer because of this thing. And it just so happens that this thing is an easy target for the political, controversy, right?
Sure.
So it became a lot of moral righteousness in the wake of the LIV Tour. And obviously this merger in the past couple of days has now reignited those discussions.
Yeah. Well, it's also identified the hypocrisy that like the PGA was never some moral entity.
No,
they were just also capitalists. Also, I will say one thing: when the quotes from Phil Mickelson's autobiography got leaked, where he said like these are bad motherfuckers.
Yeah,
or scary motherfuckers or whatever. It took away the innocence of, oh, we didn't actually realize how bad they were. Like they knew, the guy knew, the main guy the first guy I almost knocked your whole desk, almost crumbled the whole desk by bumping my knee into it one time. God, I gotta lose weight. But the controversial guy, the guy that was already a heel in golf in a lot of cases,
right?
He acknowledged that people don't like these guys, and I know it, and we're still gonna make this decision. Which is I actually respect that a lot more than I don't think they would have, if that didn't get leaked, I don't know that he would have ever admitted to knowing everything that he does know.
No, I think a lot of the expectation people have for these guys who have gotten into bed with the LIV Tour is that you just want them to be forthright about their intentions.
Sure.
Right? There's so many of these guys have talking points that kind of dismiss accountability for what they've done. If somebody just comes out and says, I joined this tour because it's going to give me more money than I've ever had in my life. And it's going to set me up forever. It's going to set my family up forever, future generations of my family forever.
Yeah.
That's why I did this. I think a lot of people would be like, all right,
yeah,
that's fine. I guess I would have done something similar.
Maybe. I think there's a lot of people who'd be like, yeah, but what about the families? Your family's set up, but what about the families of people who lost people in 9/11? And I fully respect that. It's not to take away from 9/11. In fact, I do think that the Saudi government is like they're a stain on the earth. But I think that when you leave America, when you talk to people from outside of America, the U.S. government is not viewed as this like righteous, entity that is creating peace in the world.
I mean, in a lot of places, we're probably on the same level.
Of course.
As the Saudis to people outside of the U.S.
Sure.
And that's, a lot of people say, people that went to the LIV Tour who took this money, they're taking blood money. And my argument would be that all money is blood money when you get right down to it, right?
Sure.
Like we think if it originates in America, then it's okay, right? If your company is from here and they're the one giving you your paycheck, then it's okay. And it's like, man, when you get up to the top of those companies, all you got to do is watch a show like Succession on HBO, and you'll see that even the people with the money in America are not exactly great people.
Right.
There's just a reality that we often try to make ourselves naive to in some ways.
It's hard to become an employee of any company without bending your morality to some degree.
Absolutely.
And then as the incentives get larger, and these guys, many of them are very wealthy, but not all of them. Like some of the guys that are in the LIV Tour were not like top level PGA golfers. Yeah. These are guys that maybe this is their only opportunity. It's my thing with this, it's common in all sports, which is that fans have a hard time understanding that almost all of them should relate with the players who are labor instead of the owners who are management, right? And in this case, it's like you're defending the PGA. You should, to me, the PGA could have avoided this by being more generous to their players, to making them make the product more interesting for the consumers, all that stuff. Get rid of the this like stuffy image that golf rightly has, make younger people like it by making younger people like it, not by like holding a monopoly and going like it or watch or don't watch golf.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's anyone who you can feel sorry for in this situation, it's like the average PGA golfer, right? And golf especially, golf is one of those sports where, unlike most of our pro sports, you know, in football, basketball, baseball, you're paying players obviously to their performance to some degree, but a lot of times you're handing out contracts to guys who don't deserve it or they don't live up to the money, right? In golf, more than any other sport, you're getting paid for performance. You are literally competing for your paycheck every week with the people you play against.
Not only are you competing for your paycheck, but you're investing money every week.
You're paying to play, basically. So golf, more than any other sport, you should be siding with the players over the league.
Sure.
You know, the head of the PGA decided to sell out. He's going to get a ton of money, I'm sure, from the Saudi government for doing this. The problem, if you are a golf fan now, or even just a sports fan in general, or even just somebody who cares about social morality, is that the Saudi Arabian government basically owns all of golf. I know it'll of course get phrased differently, but the reality is the LIV Tour basically bought the PGA, which means the Saudi government basically bought all of the golf leagues in the world, the major pro golf leagues. So that in and of itself, now you've just created a different monopoly. Previously, there was an American monopoly, you could say, with the PGA.
Sure.
Now there's a Saudi monopoly on golf. And so we're kind of back to square one, except ownership. There's been a transfer of ownership. That's about it.
One before we move on, because I don't think we should, because we're an hour and 7 minutes into this. Oh, did I lose it? I think I might have lost my thought. I might have just blurted out when I think of it later.
Okay, that's fine. The one thing I'll just say at the end of this is that the PGA golfers, they learned...
I know what it was.
Okay, go ahead.
The guys that got fucked the hardest are the guys who were on the fringe of the modern PGA, because the fringe dropped. It went lower because there were these, whatever, 54, whatever amount of golfers in the LIV Tour that were all ranked ahead of those guys. And these guys had the aspirations.
Yeah.
They probably invested money in them, in their training, in these tournaments, qualifying tournaments they're playing. That now they're like, well, now the carrot it's much further away than it was a day ago. Kind of like, but I'll say that, and I'll say this about to relate it to comedy, which I would obnoxiously do about almost anything, is there was a new club that opened in Tacoma a couple years ago. Super funny comedy club. They've never booked me on one show ever. Now, of course, am I bitter about that? Of course I am. I'm a fucking egomaniac. But I still want the club to exist. I want them to succeed, because the more spots there are, the more spots I get.
Yeah, more opportunity.
Right. It means that, like, I've always put it like because comics are inherently like insecure and all that. There's like 6 local comedian spots every weekend in the Seattle-Tacoma area. With them open, there's 8. 8 is not a lot. There's like 500 people trying to do comedy in Seattle. 8 of us get to do it every Friday and Saturday, and on like a paid club show. Yeah. So the fact that there's 8 means that there's like, maybe I'll get 1 more gig a year, 2 more gigs a year, because somebody else is doing these other, these 8 gigs. Yeah. More often or whatever, or at this other place. So it's the more spaces there was good for the people at the bottom end. Yeah. And that this could potentially, we don't actually know the structure though. Those guys could actually still benefit.
No, I think you're right. I mean, the guys who were kind of poised to become the new faces of the PGA are now back to where they were in the pecking order before the LIV Tour.
But I'm even talking about the guys who are like at the
very bottom,
like at the fringe of even being in the league, not the fringe of being famous, but even the fringe of being part of the PGA.
Right, guys who were just barely making it into these tournaments in the first place. Right, now might be knocked out of these tournaments again, because who knows what this structure is going to look like. But I mean, the thing it seems like they learned, and this is something we all learn at various points in life, regardless of your profession, is that at the end of the day, no matter how often you're told by your employer that they care about you, that we're a family, your employer doesn't, they care about the money.
Tugging at my heartstrings right now.
They care about the money more than they care about you. Yeah. That's the society we live in. It's a capitalistic society. That is the reality of the world we are a part of. And these PGA golfers learned that the hard way yesterday, as many of us often do.
Sure.
When we're working. And it sucks to have, I'm sure for a lot of these guys who have never had a real job, outside of playing golf, this is blindsiding to them. Yeah. And it's blindsiding to all of us once you realize that. But when you realize it, then you can kind of shift your approach. You understand that, like, hey, we're all in it to make money, myself included. And at the end of the day, you got to look out for yourself. And that's ultimately what the PGA commissioner did. And it sucks for the guys that trusted him. It sucks for those guys because they trusted this guy to do right by them, and he did not. He did right by himself.
Yep.
So